Is the Iran war finally over?
Iran begged for this ceasefire, and we all know it.
The US and Iran have agreed a last-minute ceasefire deal after Trump set a deadline to wipe out a whole civilization. And that means one of the world's most important shipping routes, the Strait of Hormuz, could now reopen. And that means oil costs, fuel costs, and even the cost of living could come down. Countries around the world have cautiously celebrated the ceasefire announcement. But what's in this peace deal, and how does a ceasefire actually work? Here's Tyler Anderson with the breakdown.
For more than a month, the United States and Israel have been at war with Iran. Since the end of February, at least 3,500 people have been killed in Iran, with many more across the Middle East. When Iran's supreme leader was assassinated at the end of February by Israel, how and when the fighting would come to an end wasn't very clear.
Right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks.
2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3.
The president wants to do it really quickly. After that, he'll get bored. I don't get bored.
And when President Trump posted yesterday on social media that a whole civilization will die tonight if Iran didn't back down by his 8 p.m. deadline, a path to peace seemed unlikely. Just 90 minutes before that deadline, with Pakistan helping as the middleman, a deal was struck between the US and Iran.
What the president did is he basically issued an ultimatum to the Iranians. He said, open up the straits, stop trying to hold the world's economy hostage, and we'll engage in a ceasefire.
So what do both sides want? For the US, it wants to see the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. This strip of water has been in the spotlight since the war started. It's vital for international trade. Ships carrying millions of barrels of oil and gas pass through every year. But since the start of the war, it has been shut. And the price of oil, among other things, has skyrocketed, with fears back in the UK of fuel shortages and bigger energy bills. Iran's 10-point peace plan includes accepting their nuclear program, keeping control of the Strait of Hormuz, and for attacks on its country to stop. So, if those things happen, then in theory, this ceasefire could lead to successfully negotiating the end of the war. But will America agree? Here's what other countries think about the deal.
I think there'll be a sense of real relief, there certainly is across the region and for the United Kingdom.
It is positive, therefore, to see today the suggestion of a ceasefire and the potential reopening of the Strait of Hormuz.
We welcome the ceasefire reached and hope that it will lead to a lasting peace in West Asia.
However, ceasefire doesn't automatically mean an end to fighting. Pausing fighting in Lebanon between Iranian-backed Hezbollah militia and Israel hasn't been included in the deal. That's despite Pakistan initially saying it was. The death toll there is now more than 1,500 people. And last October, Trump helped to broker a deal between Israel and Hamas for a ceasefire in Gaza after 2 years of war there. Since then though, both sides have accused each other of violating that agreement. Hundreds of Palestinians have been killed, as well as some Israeli soldiers. Even if it's just temporary, this ceasefire between Iran and the US does show some promise. Oil prices have started to come down and the stock market is improving. But with both sides claiming victory for themselves, it's now what they can agree on together that'll make or break the next 2 weeks.
Thanks, Tyler. So when it comes to the Iran war, as with everything with Donald Trump, it's happening really fast and things are changing all the time. So will a ceasefire really pave the way for long-term peace, or is it just kicking the can down the road? To help answer those questions, I want to bring in Freddie Gower. He's one of our own senior foreign producers who's been covering the Middle East for years. Thanks for joining us, Freddie. It's good to see you. It's been a while. You've actually just been over in the Middle East, haven't you? What was it like?
That's right. I've just been in Israel for the past 2 weeks or so with the Channel 4 News team. It's obviously a really tense time to be there. You know, there was Iranian missiles coming in on a daily basis. But we were there basically to try and understand this war from the Israeli perspective, to ask military people, politicians, ordinary Israelis, what they were wanting to get out of this war. And obviously we had a range of views, but it's clear that over there in Israel, people are largely supportive of the action that the Israeli government has taken against Iran. They've always seen Iran as a massive threat.
So before we get to the ceasefire stuff, Freddie, I think it's worth us just rewinding. Can you tell us how we got to this point of there being this war in Iran?
I think the best way to think of the situation is like a massive long-running feud between America and Israel on one side and Iran on the other side. And the war started because that feud finally reached boiling point, basically. For nearly 50 years, Iran has been run by Islamic clerics after their revolution. And they've always seen America and its ally Israel as bullies, basically, who want to dominate the region, who are opposed to their beliefs, who've always wanted to topple them. America and Israel, on the other hand, see Iran as a threat because they believe Iran's leaders want to build a nuclear bomb, because Iran had been building up its supplies of missiles, and because Iran has given money and weapons to groups across the region who have attacked Israel. Now, Iranian leaders have described America and Israel as the big and little Satan. So there's obviously no love lost between the two sides. But on February 28th, Donald Trump decided that talking was no use, there was no point to it anymore, and he started bombing Iran to try and get them to bend to his demands and bend to his will.
What did you make of Trump saying he was going to wipe out civilization? Obviously, we're always talking now about Taco, Trump always chickens out. Did you think he was bluffing?
Well, the honest answer is that we can't know, because we can't see into Donald Trump's head. It's worth remembering, though, that Trump has made a lot of threats in the past which haven't come to pass, which he hasn't carried out. He talked about imposing 100% tariffs on countries that America does business with. Didn't happen. He talked about invading Greenland, about taking the Panama Canal. Didn't happen. So we have to take everything he says with a big pinch of salt. It's true, though, that the American military is incredibly powerful. They have the firepower to inflict huge damage. Wiping out a civilization, though, that's a bit more difficult. And it's important to say as well that even just seeing an American president speak with this kind of language, to use terms like wiping out a civilization, it's just totally shocking. It's beyond anything we've heard before from an American president. And many people see it as a sign of Trump's desperation.
And so the big question, really, is this ceasefire legit? Does it mean the war ends?
We know the ceasefire is legit in the sense that both sides have acknowledged it. But whether or not this means the war ends is a completely different question. Both America and Iran still have huge differences in what they're demanding. And those differences have likely got bigger as a result of the war, not smaller. Because they, A, having survived, and B, having demonstrated the power that they hold over the world economy, have started talking about other things that they want. That's formalizing their control over the Strait of Hormuz. That's reparations, i.e. America paying the money for the damage caused. And stuff like that is not really going to fly with the Americans. It's hard to see them agreeing to that.
You mentioned the Strait of Hormuz a lot there. If it did reopen, how significant would that be?
Well, the Strait of Hormuz, it's absolutely crucial. If you imagine the Persian Gulf, that's the sea between Iran and the Gulf countries, like a big room full of oil and gas. And to get that oil and gas out, it has to pass through a tiny little hallway. And that hallway, that little stretch of sea, is called the Strait of Hormuz. So during the war, most of that supply was cut off, almost all of it, meaning there was less oil and gas available, meaning it became more expensive. And that, in the end, is making everyday life more expensive for people in countries across the world. So if the Strait is reopening, and that's still a big if, that is good news for the world.
What about Israel and Lebanon in all of this?
Yeah, it's a good question. Lebanon is the country just to the north of Israel. And when this war started with Iran, Israel also invaded Lebanon. And that's because Lebanon is home to an armed group called Hezbollah, who are allied to Iran. Iran gives them money and weapons. And more than 1,500 people have been killed in Lebanon as a result of Israel's attacks, and possibly more than 1 million displaced, so a huge number. Initially, we were told by Pakistan, so that's the country that helped broker this deal, that the ceasefire did include Lebanon, and so the war would end there as well. But we've since heard from Benjamin Netanyahu's office, that's the Prime Minister of Israel, that Israel would continue its operations in Lebanon. What we can say for sure, though, is that this deal, or any deal that happens between the US and Iran, is unlikely to resolve that long-running history and tension between Israel and Hezbollah.
Now, we know that Trump's brokered a ceasefire before with Gaza. I know you've done a lot of work on that. What can we learn from comparing this with the situation in Gaza?
It's not necessarily a promising sign of things to come for this Iran situation. And that's because we know Donald Trump loves to make a big splash. He loves a big TV moment, announcing a huge deal to bring about peace. The problem is, after these deals are announced a lot of the time, the details become murky. So the deal that was announced last October brought about the end of 2 years of horrific conflicts in which more than 70,000 Palestinians in Gaza were killed, many of them women and children. But what's happened since then, you couldn't really describe as peace. Around 700 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed since that deal took effect. Israel is still occupying around half of the Gaza Strip. Hamas, the Palestinian armed group, controls the other half. When we think about the situation with Iran, there's all that same potential for issues within the talks. We know that the Iranians and the Americans have huge differences in what they're demanding. And although Trump's very keen to present this as a huge moment for world peace, as I think he said earlier, then we have to be a bit more skeptical and look at all of the differences that still exist between the two sides before we can say that this is going to lead to anything like a long-term peace.
Finally then, the hardest question where I ask you to predict the future. What do you think is next with this deal? Do you think it's going to be permanent, something more temporary, or something in between?
What I would say is that this ceasefire is a good thing in the short term. American and Israeli bombs have stopped falling on Iran. Iranian rockets and drones will stop hitting Gulf states, and the Strait of Hormuz will be open, reportedly. So there is a short-term relief there. Longer term, though, it's really difficult to say from our position here. The rhetoric now from both President Trump and Iran's leaders doesn't suggest they're immediately about to lower their demands. So it's hard to see how a deal can be reached in this 2-week period that's been announced today. But we have to hope that through the mediators, through calm heads sitting across the negotiating table, that hopefully some kind of compromise will be reached.
All right, fascinating insight there, Freddie. Thanks very much for joining us. That's the breakdown. Thanks for watching. See you next time.